Good evening, everybody. This is Monica Guzman coming to you live once again during a weekday. So my continuing theme for this week is lead up to Independence Day 2021, and there's plenty of content to take us into this 4th of July, this wonderful weekend. And tonight, I want to read an excerpt from my favorite history textbook, The American Pageant, ninth edition, published in 1991, and and then give you a couple of quotes from Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which is a pamphlet that was at that time 47 pages long, and it just shows again what the colonists were thinking between 1765 through 1776, basically. Um, England had, or Great Britain had gotten itself into some trouble. It was trying to dominate the world, and in dominating the world, it got itself into debt. Simultaneously, you had 60%, 66% of English citizens who ended up in the colonies were forming their own country. But these were majority of the colonists in 1776 on American soil. They were too busy doing their own thing. They were in search, first and foremost, they were in search of freedom of religion. They wanted to practice religion as they saw fit, as opposed to being told how to worship by the crown. And it was getting, the reason why they started leaving was because it started to get a little violent and definitely a little bit authoritative. I don't know if it was near dictatorship, but it was definitely getting uncomfortable for some people who made the trip over. Now, among the founders were several successful, accomplished men, young men. Thomas Jefferson, age 33. James Madison was somewhere between age 25 and 26. Ben Franklin also was somewhere in his late 20s as all of this is going on. And yet they were thinkers. They were critical thinkers. They were philosophers in their own right. They were scientists. They were inventors. They were planters. They some of them owned slaves. We know this. We can't change history. It is what it is. And even if some of these loser nerds out there figure out how to invent a time machine, they do realize that shifting something will shift everything else. Like, I don't know what the theory is called, but if you shift things well enough, a lot of people aren't going to end up being born. And so, I mean, if you're cool with that, if you're cool with never being born because you're so adamant about going back in time and fixing what happened, then maybe, that's, we don't really need you around anyway. So, these men who signed the Declaration of Independence, the men who signed the Constitution, the men who contributed to the Bill of Rights, to the Virginia Constitution, obviously they were the cream of the crop, but they had the best intentions for their fellow citizens. And they had the foresight to realize that what the crown was doing to the colonists was wrong. And then they put together all these documents to help prevent it from happening again in the future. And as I reread these events of between 1763 through 1775, 6, even yesterday reading the grievances that Thomas Jefferson included in the Declaration of Independence, there are parallels between then and now. And it's a little bit scary. I mean, there's people out there who say that history doesn't repeat itself. And I get it that these are people coming from an atheist or an anti Puritanism point of view, definitely anti-Christian in a lot of cases. And I get it, but at the same time, it's still happening. Just because you don't accept it or you don't want to view things that way doesn't mean that it's not happening as we speak. And so it's so nice to see. Again, my main source of information right now is Twitter. I don't watch the local news. And then when we go places and they have on, it's shocking to see what's on TV and just or what the news is reporting locally. It's a little scary, or just it's shocking. It's shocking, when you stop watching things for a long period of time and then you go back. It's shocking how things are progressing on American soil, specifically in some cities like Los Angeles. Um, Nonetheless, it's great to see on Twitter more people talking about pushing back against the offshoot of critical theory, which is critical race theory. It's really great to see people just pushing back, just not letting things happen to you anymore, because I think that's what's happened to Americans since the 1960s. Things just keep happening to you. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up Trevor Bauer's situation one more time. Again, I am not judging the situation or attempting to litigate the situation. I feel that what MLB is doing is MLB specifically recruits your Trevor Bauers, your Alex Verdugos, your Julio Urias, your Felipe Vasquez. They're specifically recruiting these guys that have issues. They haven't learned from the steroid stuff. Will they learn from what's happening right now with the pitchers and the sticky stuff? We'll see. But they're specifically recruiting guys who have mental health issues, who are sexual predators. And I believe it's on purpose, again, because Americans don't run MLB the same way Americans don't run America anymore. And so MLB is doing is they're knowingly recruiting these guys. I talked the other day about the Yankees under the Steinbrenners, and more so in this current era with Hal Steinbrenner and then Cashman. What they do is they specifically recruit guys with problems, or they recruited guys who later turned out to have problems, like their closer who apparently threatened his girlfriend while shooting a gun. One of their starting pitchers who slapped his girlfriend in front of his teammates at a charity event. And then you've got steroid users from the 2000s. The Yankees have gone, or 26 steroid users at least have gone through the Yankees organization under Cashman during the Steinbrenner ownership era. And again, what I believe is that they well, they're not Americans, first of all. It's a different culture. And it's specifically really becoming an anti-America culture thing. And then they're also, they, their actions show that they are participating in critical theory. They have spring training. During spring training, all the clubs have um, seminars. And then we don't know, nothing's been leaked, so we don't know specifically what the guys are being taught. But one year, one reporter for what used to be the Los Angeles Dodgers specifically reported that the guys received training that dealt with accepting women in the workplace, because obviously, again, the Dodgers aren't run by Americans either. And so women in the workplace is becoming more common because it's specifically anti-American culture. And so with Trevor Bauer, the notion that these supposedly intellectual males like Andrew Friedman had no idea, or your Stan Kasten, or your Mark Walter, or your Magic Johnson had no idea that Trevor Bauer has a sexual depravity side is laughable. I mean, they take a lot of pride in being forward thinking and innovative. I have a extremely hard time believing that they didn't know that Trevor Bauer participates in essentially beating up women uh, while he has sexual intercourse. And so I think what it is with Trevor Bauer is these situations are going to keep coming up. This isn't going to stop. MLB isn't going to suddenly they're not going to clean up their act. The only way MLB could clean up its act is by pushing out the Jewish community and the African community that's coming into the sport. Because you need a complete culture change. This stuff didn't happen when A.G. Spalding was around. It didn't even happen, like the Yankees didn't have these types of degenerates on their team before the Steinbrenners took over, because it was a completely different culture. And so basically, I think what they're doing is these situations are going to keep coming up. Trevor Bauer isn't the first and he's not the last. So what they're doing is they're testing the public. How much outrage will you have when the next guy is brought up on child porn charges? How much outrage will there be among the public when I mean, I can't even think of what comes after the Trevor Bauer situation, but I don't know. I guess maybe something out of Brockmire might be come out down the road. So I think it's just a test. I think they're testing the public. Now, obviously, MLB averages 1 million viewers for Sunday night games. And so Americans don't care about MLB anymore, but someone like myself who is entrenched in this fear, I do pay attention because I see the parallels between American 2021 and what's happening in MLB, what continues to happen in MLB. And so for me, again, my shtick is the parallels between American baseball history and American history, mainly between the mid 1800s through about just before 1940. And so all of this ties together for me, and I'm offering a different perspective to people out there who, for example, are solely focused on the political side of what's happening. We've got to also look at the culture side, and there's people out there who look at the education side in public schools, and all of this will eventually come together, and hopefully will be worthy of wearing the label rebels as the founders were labeled. um, and I think it sounds better than patriots at this point. It's about rebelling against what's going on in the American government. um, Everything the colonists or the founders, the signatories of the Declaration of Independence were fighting against, warning against, is happening right now to Americans. And the difference is that it's a different type of suppression, I guess, because we're dealing with digital means, right? We're dealing with just different. They didn't have an FBI back then. They didn't have a CIA back then. They didn't have an NSA back then. So it's still a battle by other means. Is how I'm taking a look at this. So let me give you a quick overview of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Thomas Paine preaches common sense. Why did Americans continue to deny any intention of independence? Loyalty to the empire was deeply ingrained. Colonial unity was poor, and open rebellion was dangerous, especially against a formidable Britain. Irish rebels of that day were customarily hanged, drawn, and quartered. American rebels might have fared no better. As of late January 1776, 5 months before independence was declared, the king's health was being toasted by the officers of Washington's mess near Boston. God Save the King had not been replaced by God Save the Congress yet. Gradually, the Americans were shocked into an awareness of their inconsistency. Their eyes were jolted open by harsh British acts like the burning of Falmouth and Norfolk, and especially by the hiring of the Haitians. Then in 1776 came the publication of Common Sense, one of the most influential pamphlets ever written. Its author was the radical Thomas Paine, once an impoverished corset maker's apprentice who had come over from England a year earlier. His tract became a whirlwind bestseller, and within a few months reached the astonishing total of 120,000 copies. And and that's part of it. Again, I describe the importance of blue collar work for men. I think it gives you a different perspective on life. And I think there's so many videos out there right now of young college men who are bored out of their minds, and that's why they get into this climate change nonsense and this beta mindset, and they're playing video games and they're smoking pot. And so by helping guys, young men, find meaningful work in agriculture, in ranching and farming, in manufacturing, right, idle hands are the devil's playthings. It keeps them out of trouble. It gives them a sense of purpose. And if nothing else, it serves as an apprenticeship for a year, 2 years. It puts money in their pocket. It gives them an opportunity to purchase property. It gives them an opportunity to have a sense of self-worth before they start searching for their spouse. That way they are more grounded, they have more credibility, they have more maturity, and they're not so weak. Um, I is questionable, and I've already reached a couple of conclusions before I made my lifestyle changes. I was nearing this conclusion, and having the experience that I've had is just kind of solidified it. I was already coming to this conclusion based on some statistics that I've seen about the military and their health. And then obviously MLB has, I mean, with when it comes to MLB, it's the better question to ask is who isn't injured as opposed to who's injured now, because I don't know what percentage it's at, but it's a high percentage where basically most of the guys who put on an MLB uniform have had some sort of injury at some point, whether it was before they got to the big leagues or after, but the injury rates are high. And there's a reason for that. There's definitely a reason for that. And, but that's something I need to save because it's, it's, it's good insight, but it's gonna help beyond baseball and beyond, um, it's again, it's something that's overreaching further out. And so here you have Thomas Paine, once an impoverished corset maker's apprentice. So they didn't all come from wealth. So this notion of you got to keep funding the public schools is nonsense. And we know this. We know that that's money being burnt. It ends up funding um, activists and other people who know where to make a quick buck. Um, More public schools isn't the answer. More funding per public schools isn't the answer. The person that's going to succeed is going to figure out. And if anything, they're going to come out stronger if they're forced to problem solve their way through a lack of funding. Again, my high school experience, we funded, we fundraised all the time. I, for across the board, everybody had to. The dance had to fundraise. The football team, the basketball team, the baseball team, the newspaper, the cheerleaders. Everybody had to fundraise, and I think a lot of us are better for it because it definitely upped our salesmanship skills. Um, so coming from wealth in America isn't a determining factor. If you push hard enough, you can find your way to the top. If anything, the 1960s impacted people's mobility, people's ability to improve their class. For example, the switch from apprenticeships to internships occurred around the 1960s. That causes an imbalance, sure, but it wasn't Americans who instituted this stuff. I think Americans get a lot of blame, again, because there's no distinguishing factors. When you're looking at who is leading the country right now, they look white, but they're not Caucasian. That's the difference. MLB, there was an ESPN article on MLB that talked about Farhan Zaidi had the audacity to say, well, it can't always continue being Caucasian. And he's right. MLB is no longer run by Caucasians. He is a Pakistani from Canada. And then every team is headed by a front office that isn't run by Caucasians either. So who is the dominant culture running MLB? Maybe that's what we're supposed to be exploring, which is what I'm exploring. And hopefully I can push it out far enough to where other people understand and start to make the connection that I've made about the people who run MLB are the same people who run the country. So this inequality of wealth wasn't caused by Americans. I had a conversation with a very elderly woman a few weeks ago, and she started talking about um, how we're running out of water in California. And it's true, we're in another drought again, but I explained to her that some areas have had their water diverted from them for several years for so-called environmental process, namely Central California. So there's water being diverted out of some areas, and then you've got just stupid people in these bureaucratic positions who are again stupid and don't know how to save our water properly. And the fact that California is overcrowded, there are people still crossing over the border. So, of course, the resources that would be able to maintain an American population of California have to be spread out among non Americans or illegals residing in California. And so I just wasn't, that day, I wasn't in the mood to let something like that go by because she was being very adamant. I was like, my conscience is clear. We're not wasting water. But let me tell you what's causing water to be such a scarce resource. The way electricity is now a scarce resource in California, thanks to the numbskulls with their electric powered cars. Now there you've got some members of the population stuck with cars that they can't charge. And was it by 2032 that Gavin Newsom wants to eliminate gas powered cars? I mean, really, like, the stupid is real, right? So, but so we had this conversation, and I was as nice as I could be while still pointing out a couple things. But she did make a very good point. In the 1960s, Mexicans received contracts to work agriculture in California, but the contracts were for a set period of time. So maybe these contracts lasted 2 months. And then when the contract was over, they had to return to Mexico. And that was, I mean, to me, that sounds like a win-win because the agriculture stuff in California, obviously the population was much lower at that point. Nonetheless, the agriculture stuff was getting done. You had Mexicans who found work, but then at the end of the contract, they returned to Mexico with whatever they earned. And then Californians didn't have to put out extra tax money to give them resources, right? Like, it's true the way, and it's not just Mexicans anymore. Obviously, it's other people that receive large amounts in government cheese. And so, what really turned things out on their head was the 1965 immigration bill by one of the Kennedys, whom I have not had the chance and will never have the chance to study, but it's worth figuring out who was pulling the strings on that puppet. Maybe there's people out there who already know the answer to this question. I don't, so I'm asking it. But that's what turned things on its head, and a lot of people out there know this. So one of the things we can do is start the contract thing again. So we lessen the population in California. Mexicans, I'm going to use Mexicans because I don't think your other Central Americans or your Southern America residents, citizens are coming here for the same purpose that Mexicans were coming for in the 1960s. So that's definitely a solution. But okay, again, I digress. Let's get back to Thomas Paine. Paine flatly branded the shilly-shallying. I love these kinds of phrases. Shilly-shallying. Um, when I read this the other day, I thought about Mike Scioscia, who said poppycock, and Twitter was like flipping out. At least MLB Twitter was flipping out over poppycock. What's that? But these are just such awesome phrases, old timey phrases that get used every so often. So shilly shallying of the colonials as contrary to common sense. Why not throw off the cloak of inconsistency? Nowhere in the physical universe did the smaller heavenly body control the larger one. Then why would the tiny island of England control the vast continent of America? As for the king, whom the Americans professed to revere, he was nothing but the royal brute of Great Britain. America had a sacred mission, a moral obligation to the world to set herself as an independent, democratic republic, untainted by association with corrupt and monarchical Britain. Paine's passionate protest was eloquent and radical, even doubly radical. It called not simply for independence, but for republicanism. Paine thus penned both persuasive propaganda and potent political theory. He helped thousands of American waverers, hesitant to make the break with Britain, to see that their cause embraced both self determination and democracy. He also forcefully reminded them that they could not hope for open aid from France as long as they swore allegiance to the British king. The French crown was interested in destroying the British Empire, not in helping to reconstruct it under a plan of reconciliation. And again, this is a time when the world was taking its place, or the world was taking its shape. You have Britain trying to dominate, the French trying to dominate, and then I guess this is when, well, the Spaniards were exploring. I believe was already starting to lose its power. So you had there was just a lot going on. And I mean, things eventually settled, and it was thanks to the colonists. When the colonists declared their independence, it helped Canada. It helped Canada take its shape to what it is today. And it helped, I mean, it obviously didn't help France. It didn't help Great Britain because their power started to shrink. But it helped America nonetheless. And Tom Paine was persuasive. I mean, so this book has several contributing authors, right? Some of them specialize in certain eras of America, and therefore they write their own chapters. And so you can comes out, right? And so the author of this particular section called it propaganda, but it was persuasive and it worked. It sold 120,000 copies, and it helped those who were in doubt. So that's something that's definitely lacking today. Again, for me, those of us that identify on the right, we don't have a leader, and I have no idea where that leader is going to come from. I personally, because I've read Trump's books, I always knew he had aspirations to run for president. And I can tell you that when I did participate in a couple of Republican groups, it was like heresy to say, oh, a businessman can become president of the United States. These are the types of Republicans that were like, you've got to be raised in politics to become president. And that's, you know, that's part of the problem with several Republican parties across the country. Maybe it could be a California thing, but I mean, a lot of you know that California Republicans may as well be Democrats, and they're just a hop, skip, and a jump away. And it's true, I've experienced it for myself. Um, but so with Trump, I've read all his books. I When I got out of college, I didn't pick up a book for a few years. I was actually tired of reading at that point. And the first book that I read post college was The Art of the Deal. And this is around the time when Trump launched The Apprentice. And that first season of The Apprentice was stellar. Unfortunately, what happens with these reality TV shows is that people figure out how to game it. And so it stops being authentic. Like, for example, I watched it started with the Real Housewives of Orange County. And those first 3 seasons of that show were very authentic, they were stellar. Um, the wives were actually married and they were empowered women. But they had their own thing going on without it's not like today where they find stuff to do so that they can stay on the show, right? Nobody wants to follow, I guess, a boring housewife or ex-housewife. So they basically spend their off season searching for projects to bring onto the show to make them interesting to audience so that they'll bring them on for following seasons. But the Real Housewives of Orange County, the first 3 seasons, those women were already self-made. It wasn't until the 4th season when they brought on Tamara that things started to go sideways, and I guess they brought her on because I mean, she was bitchy. She brought the bitchy factor, right? And so for me, I mean, I'm sure there are Tamara fans out there, but for me, I lost interest. And the second season of The Apprentice kind of took a similar turn where I figure out how to game it. And it started to become less authentic with every season that went. Um, but with Trump, I wasn't surprised when he decided to run for president. And I think that he did everything he could. Unfortunately, there was already a Jewish influence in the White House, and we don't know how much that derailed him. Now there's a full blown Jewish influence in the White House. So we'll see. I mean, I'm sure America will still be standing post Biden. If Kamala does become president, will America still be standing after that? We shall see. And hopefully you guys are preparing for that because it's no joke. So a couple quotes, because Thomas Paine's Common Sense was 47 pages long. And it's very, I realized, okay, so I have to adhere sometimes to the Chicago style manual, and then sometimes it's the AP style manual, and then there's one more out there. And I didn't realize the significance of style manuals until I started going through these old documents, namely Edward Winslow's letter to his friend. Edward Winslow's letter to his friend in England is the letter that basically says, yes, there was a first Thanksgiving and this is when it took place. But it's basically one long run on sentence, right? As opposed to today where we use grammar and syntax and everything that comes with it. And so Thomas Paine's pamphlet reads it's not like reading Shakespeare, but it's there. And so you've got to really have a grasp of the language that was used in those days to really like understand it. So if you anybody who has time, go for it. You can find the Dover version of Common Sense. I mean, those things don't sell for more than $5, so it's definitely something to build. If you're into books, build your collection with those things, or those types of books. So let me most meaningful from Thomas Paine's Common Sense pamphlet. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. Super important quote. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who have heard it. Government is a necessary evil. What was the purpose of government in the beginning? I mean, from my understanding, government is supposed to protect its residents and citizens. And I'm thinking of locally, right? What's your city government supposed to provide to you with the taxes that you pay to them? Public services like water, sewer services, um, electricity. So basic services, right? I mean, public schools didn't become a thing until right before the Civil War. The Republicans finally gave in and started funding public schools. So that's not really a service that we need. Like, there are ways to educate children. There are, especially right now. Um, so when you think about government, it's the same idea where your taxes are supposed to pay for specific foundational services, not all the welfare, the all the other nonsense that's going on right now. That's for me, that's a lot of the stuff that needs to get rolled back. All those agencies that sprouted in the 1960s, like HUD, Department of Education, they have to go. And what will happen is, I was thinking about this today. If we roll back all these bureaucratic offices, it's attractive to people who are just searching for, as Bill O'Reilly used to say, free stuff. If we roll back these bureaucratic agencies that started sprouting in the 1960s, if we get rid of them, it makes America less attractive for people just searching for free stuff. So it's definitely something that we've got to consider really pushing forward if we're really going to call ourselves rebels. And again, government is a necessary evil. You need it, but you need it to be small. You need it to be tiny. You need it to be insignificant. Government is just a necessary evil that needs to be controlled by we the people. To say they will never attempt it again is idle and visionary. We thought so at the repeal of the Stamp Act, yet a year or two undeceived us. So they were reeling. They were very much reeling after the Crown started imposing all those taxes on the colonists to pay for the debts that Great Britain had accrued. Britain did accrue this debt and they needed a way to pay for it. And they taxed the colonists, but the colonists never forgot what the Crown did. And here, this is 1776, and all this stuff was happening in 1773, 1774. Still, the sting still burns. It never went away. I totally get that. That's a Yellowstone quote. A lot of people are happy to hear that Yellowstone's coming back in the fall, which see, I'm an early adopter. I always come into these things on the third installment. I got into the Twilight series when I saw the third movie. I didn't see the first two. Yellowstone last year was the first time we watched it. It was the third season. And that's just the way it goes. But Yellowstone's coming back. Well, it's gonna be insane. We'll see. I mean, I hope they bring all their characters back, but we'll see, right? But anyway, so the sting still stung, um, and it never goes away. So for the colonists, the Stamped Act, the sting of the Stamped Act never went away. It remained within them, and that's one of the things that helped them be determined to declare independence and to limit the role of government in their lives going forward. Why is it that we hesitate? From Britain, we can expect nothing but ruin. If she is admitted to the government of America again, this continent will not be worth living in. So they wanted separation, they wanted independence, and they wanted to be free of the crown. Now, Great Britain today or England today doesn't pose this kind of threat to America. The threat comes from within. Um, the threat is here. It's in the White House. It's in all these government agencies. It is in our professional sports. The threat is here. The threat is very present, and the threat continues to move forward. So you've got more. I believe more people, especially maybe this Independence Day, will realize what's happening, and there will be more people pushing back. Again, 70 million already know that something sketchy happened this 2020 election season. And so don't forget that. Maybe that's your Stamp Act sting, which sometimes you need something like that to motivate you. So here, they don't trust that the crown will behave, the crown will follow through on promises. They've had enough. I mean, again, the Irish were dealt with, and the colonists were dealt with too, not as severely, but they were dealt with. And they had no trial by jury. They had insane amounts of bail placed on them, so they couldn't get out of jail. Bad stuff was happening, basically. And the last quote is, until an independence is declared, the continent will feel itself like a man who continues putting off some unpleasant business from day to day, yet knows it must be done, hates to set about it, wishes it over, and is continually haunted with the thoughts of its necessity. So basically, don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today. And I think we've all had that feeling, right? Like something that you know you need to get done, but you don't want to get it done. But it turns out the sooner you get it done, the because you can move on from it. And but again, here Thomas Paine is persuading the colonists who were on the fence about moving forward with declaring independence, which is technically July 2nd. I had no time to prepare something for pre-Independence Day, but maybe next year I'll do some digging around and find more stuff on James Madison declaring technically July 2nd as Independence Day that will be celebrated going forward with fireworks. Again, it depends on where you live, but I know we hear fireworks all the time. The people enjoy fireworks. They're into it. They're fun and they're nice to watch, right? But there again, there are some cities in California that are preventing fireworks, which is really weird because they're surrounded by cities that are allowing them. We've seen the little kiosks where they sell them. They're open now. I guess they only let them open a few days beforehand. And so, so I'm gonna start wrapping this up. I want to start summarizing everything because tomorrow my focus is going to be Boston. And it's not just going to be Boston as it relates to Independence Day. It's Boston on groups of people trying to turn Boston into Baltimore, Chicago, Detroit, a wasteland, a wasteland. I mean, Atlanta's degenerate. It's not necessarily a wasteland, but it's definitely degenerate, isn't it? Like stripper central over there. And I'm not trying to be Puritan or I'm definitely not trying to be Puritan about this, but I'm definitely saying that a lot of what they're trying to spread on American soil culture wise comes from Jamaican culture. The country that has an average IQ of 71 and is best known for smoking pot and Bob Marley and reggae music. None of those are American. And we can all appreciate Jamaican culture for Jamaicans in Jamaica, but that's what they're trying to spread here, right? Like the smoking pot stuff, the twerking on ambulances trying to get to the hospital because they've got someone inside, the don't learn to read in public school, don't learn to do math, don't learn to critically think, don't learn economics, don't learn reasoning. That all of this stuff is simply because a small portion of the population can't keep up with the rest of the population. So, and this is what I'm saying with that's definitely disturbing with the Christopher Rufo stuff. Um, if all the races get mixed, this isn't about leveling up. This is about leveling down. They want to mix everybody with the dumbest among us. This Afro Latino thing, no, it's not going to fly. The Dominicans are already 90% descendants of African slaves, so there's nothing that can be done about the Dominicans, but those of us that have like almost zero African descendancy, it is not a good idea to start the Afro trend now because it drops the IQ level even further. We should be helping the African community raise their IQ level, not drop it, and then in the process take everybody else down with, and that's going to raise their IQ level. I understand that there's a lot of white guilt out there, and you're doing your best to help them out, but sticking them in public schools where they already can't keep up isn't the answer. There's got to be other ways to help them out. But it's not sinking even more American tax dollars into a failing system. So let's not Afro. I object to Africanization of Mexicans. No, Mexico has enough problems as it is. But again, if we're gonna mix all the races together, where you like Christopher Rufo said on Tim's show, you're not going to be able to tell who's who anymore. They're not going to mix people to get smarter. They're going to mix people to get the population dumber. And I 100% push back against that nonsense. And so again, as an American citizen, it's in my best interest to help this country continue to thrive. And I'm so happy that there are more people out there on this 4th of July weekend or Independence Day weekend tweeting and talking and discussing and realizing and learning that we have to keep stuff found in this book alive. Just I realized this as I was researching American baseball history. If nobody talks about the stuff that I'm talking about in terms of baseball, MLB will pretend that it started with the Negro Leagues. And that just is an outright lie. American baseball can find its roots possibly all the way back to 1879 at Harvard. And then, not just that, baseball has its roots, as does golf, in England. Golf has its roots in England and Scotland. And so, you know, we hear our generations, whether you're a boomer or whether you're Gen X like myself, we are doing our best to reignite American history. But you got to understand also that what they're counting on is that the generations after us aren't going to do this. How many people have taken it upon themselves to study American baseball history? Given that it's an afterthought, I feel like I'm the only one working on this. So I carved out a niche for myself. But in larger terms, American history itself, there needs to be a conscious effort to start telling these stories, because if they have spent the last, what is it, 70 years, 60 years, the last 60 years, slowly decaying society on American soil. If you don't think you've got another 60 years to wait us out in them, you're wrong. You are wrong. Because again, you and I are not the targets. Those of us who think and who look and who analyze, we're not the targets. The targets are our grandchildren, our future grandchildren, our future great grandchildren. And so there needs to be some sort of effort to push this stuff down so that it's going to get passed forward with them. Because as soon as it stops, as soon as as soon as the country stops passing this stuff down, it's going to get really dicey, especially because what they're going to look back on is the entertainment of the 80s, 90s, and right now, where they see Africans on the screen. Or in professional base sports, they see Africans. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to the NFL once Tom Brady retires. That's definitely going to be, I mean, they're trying to set up Patrick Mahomes as the next big thing, and they failed miserably at that. So putting Africans on magazines, putting Africans on TV shows, putting Africans on wherever you look, they're there. They're there, present. And it's crazy because again, they're only 12% of the population, but they are being strategically placed. Something that maybe somebody out there can figure out is Africans are only 12% of the American population. So, do they really expect the rest of the country to succumb to 12% of the population? And again, this is why I object to the Afronization of Mexicans, and I hope you reject it too. Do they have a plan to grow the African population past the 12%? That's definitely something to look out for. And I don't think that what they're gonna do is grow it with Africans breeding with Africans. They're gonna do what happened with Heidi Klum. Heidi Klum was married to Seal. She had children with him. So the children that they have together don't look like her. They look like him. And so maybe that's how they start to erase, how do they grow their population and erase yours? Because your kids aren't going to look like you. They're going to look like them. So maybe that's how they're going to grow from 12% to whatever they think they can reach. So that's something for somebody else to work on, though. So there's a lot of, we've got to reject it. If you want your culture to continue, you've got to reject it. You've got to reject it being Afronized. And there's also health stuff in there that I am going to talk about. One of the reasons why people are having trouble finding transplants today is because the races are already so mixed. So it's difficult to find a match. So if you drink yourself into a stupor and you need a liver transplant, but you're mixed race, good luck. Good luck with that. And you can't blame yourself. You got to look at your parents. There's a lot in that, and I am going to discuss it in future streams once I really get going. But okay, tomorrow I'm talking about Boston. I'm really excited about that. I think Boston's a great place. I know when I was there for a few days, it was it was great. You really felt patriotic going through all the tours that we went throughout New England. We did Philadelphia, Boston, DC, and something else. You definitely feel more patriotic when you do something like that. So hopefully we can revive something like that. So thank you again. I will be back tomorrow, most likely 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I'm not planning on streaming on Sunday just because I think everyone wants their Independence Day. So lots to think about. Thank you to those of you who drop into the stream. Thank you for those who watch the replay. Again, tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I'll be discussing Boston. So I hope you have a wonderful Saturday. I will see you soon. Thanks.